Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2024 Sanderson Farms Championship Initial Research Show. We are back. I am excited. The PGA Tour resumes this week in Jackson, Mississippi for the Sanderson Farms Championship. I hope you had a very successful Pro Tour 2 weeks ago, and if you played anything in the President's Cup, hope you had a lot of success. So feel free to jump in chat. Let me know how your 2 weeks have went. But we are here for everything Jackson, Mississippi, the CC of Jackson, Sanderson Farms. I'm excited. Let's get right into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is the best golf analytic tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much smarter golf gambler and a much better golf DFS player. Go check out fantasynational.com. You will not regret it. In the description to the video, there are links to all of the social media. First off, my X and Instagram, where normally on Mondays I post research around previous winners of the tournament of that week and any patterns that those winners follow and the players in the field that week who also fit that pattern. So that should come out tomorrow. Make sure you are on the lookout for that. My weekly betting cards and my top player usage in the DFS contest I play comes out every Wednesday night on X after the DFS Tactics show. So if you want to see the players that I'm using most often in my lineups and any wagers that I've made for that week, that comes out Wednesday evening. Give me a follow over at X. And then lastly, for social media, Gabe's handle is in the description. He writes a great article called The Fringe. It's a great way to start your week of preparation. He continues to update you throughout the week with his own version of course history and recent form, and he has let me know that he is working on something larger in the fall. We're going to give it a try. So it's a great time to start getting into his content as well. Again, his social media handle is in the description. Make sure you go give him a follow and subscribe to his article. It is free to do. And then lastly, we are live. Chat is open. Want to hear from you all. In addition to any success you have had at the Pro Tour, any success you had for the President's Cup if you played any contests there, fantasy football if you want to talk about that, maybe some fantasy baseball, playoffs and all that. Would love to hear from you all on that. What do you know of the Country Club of Jackson? Who do you think is the early favorite in your mind this week for the Sanderson Farms? So feel free to jump in chat. Would love to hear from you all this evening. So let's do our initial research for the 2024 Sanderson Farms Championship. And we are going to start, as we always do, on a Sunday evening over at the GCSAA Tournament Fact Sheet. You will notice that it is last year's Tournament Fact Sheet. They have not released this year's Tournament Fact Sheet for the Sanderson Farms. So if they do that tomorrow, I will start the show off tomorrow night with the updated GCSAA Tournament Fact Sheet. But otherwise, the Country Club of Jackson has not changed, especially from last year to this year. There was a slight renovation maybe in 2014 or 2015, but it's been a long time. The course has been pretty consistent now on the PGA Tour. It has been a full field event since 2019, so we have plenty of data for the Country Club of Jackson. CC of Jackson is originally a Mike Gogol design from 2008. One of the biggest takeaways for the Country Club of Jackson is it's fairly long, about 7,460 yards. Traditional par 72, 4 par 3s, 4 par 5s, but fairly long at over 7,400 yards. The greens slightly, and I mean slightly larger than average on the PGA Tour, about 6,200 square feet, but they are very, very fast. They are kept very, very fast. The stimp meter that I have seen most often has been 12, which would be labeled as fast, but when we go to Fantasy National, you'll actually see they have been lightning the past few years. So these are some very, very fast greens here in Jackson, Mississippi. The fairways, quite a bit of fairways and very generous fairways. These are very wide in the landing zones. at the CC of Jackson. Not a whole lot of bunkers either, averaging 2 or 3 per hole, and some of those are in the landing zone. So the greens are pretty open in terms of not a lot of danger around them. There are 5 holes with water in play. We are on Champion Bermuda greens, and there are a few courses on the PGA Tour that actually have the same listed Champion Bermuda. The CC of Jackson, Sedgefield, host of the Wyndham, is Champion Bermuda grass, and also TPC Southwind, the host of the FedEx St. Jude. So we might want to take a look at some specific Champion Bermuda throughout the week, but tonight, in terms of an initial research, we'll probably just look at some Fast and Lightning Bermuda. But if you are deep into the data and down the rabbit hole, as they say, if you wanted to take a look at some specific putting on the surface, you would want to look at, of course, the Sanderson Farms historically, putting at Sedgefield, the Wyndham Championship, and then putting at the FedEx St. Jude in Memphis. But we are on Champion Bermuda on the greens. The fairways and rough, both Bermuda, and the rough also has a little bit of zoysia. You'll notice that it's not kept very long, only 2 inches in length, but that is generally due to the Bermuda rough, which can promote some difficult lies. The ball can sit down, or players have difficulty controlling their ball out of Bermuda rough. So if players aren't used to it, it can present a challenge. We looked at that for, I believe, the Wyndham and or the FedEx St. Jude. So we'll maybe take a look at that throughout this week as well. Performance in Bermuda or on Bermuda rough courses. So that is a look at last year's GCSAA tournament fact sheet. Again, the key takeaways for the Country Club of Jackson: it's a fairly long par 72, over 7,400 yards. These greens are a little bit larger than average by PGA Tour standards. The fairways are very wide, pretty forgiving. Only 5 holes with water in play. The biggest takeaway is we are on Champion Bermuda, and they are generally kept very, very fast. So with that, let's move to Fantasy National and the players that are in the field this week. You'll see that I've got all of 2024 selected. Again, just as an initial research, get a gauge to see how these players have played in 2024. I'm going to be honest, this is a pretty barren event in terms of big names. The biggest name arguably here is Ricky Fowler, and of course he has struggled in 2024. You see 120th in terms of strokes gained total. Only one President's Cup player in the field this week, and that is Mackenzie Hughes. This has generally struggled for a few big names, although Sam Burns has played here a couple of times, a 2-time champion here, not in the field. Mackenzie Hughes has won this before. Our defending champion is Luke List, who won in a 5-man playoff last year. Some other notable names, perhaps Keith Mitchell, Mav McNeely, Johnny Vegas, winner this year on the PGA Tour, Mark Hubbard, Patrick Rogers. So again, as I was mentioning, if that is your strongest players in the field, it's pretty weak in terms of upper echelon talent on the PGA Tour. Let's see. With that, let's go ahead and just go to the course breakdown in Fantasy National. Take a look at CC of Jackson in terms of a scorecard and graphical view. The easiest holes, as per usual on the PGA Tour, the par 5s, although they aren't necessarily the biggest birdie opportunities. This isn't necessarily a birdie fest per se. It can turn that way, especially if the winds are down and all that. But these par 5s are pretty long. It's where the length of the course comes in. You got the par 5 third, just under 600 yards. Not a whole lot of eagles. You see 1.5 here, the best eagle chance is the par 5 11th at 2.5%. Decent eagle rate, no doubt, but just lots of birdies. Lots of birdies on these par 5s. 40%, 38.5%, 36, 35. Lots of birdies here, but they're very long. 591, 612, 584. The par 3s here at the Country Club of Jackson, all but one, very, very long. 214. We have the 168 is the exception. 181 mid-length, 223. You see two of them play as the two of the 5 toughest holes here at the CC of Jackson. We have a couple of longer par 4s as well, 479, 505. Lots of length here at the Country Club of Jackson. Lots of length. Not a whole lot of double bogeys other than the most difficult par 4 16th. 4.5% double. Just a few bogeys in and around Country Club of Jackson. If we move to the strokes gained by shot type per round, you're going to see a common theme through the top 10s, the top 5s, and the winners. Normal distribution would have approach and then putting, and then some combination of off the tee and around the green, depending on if the course promotes ball striking versus short game. Kind of the inverse here. Putting is such a dominant factor around the Country Club of Jackson. You see almost one shot or one stroke per round for your top 10s, and this is just going to increase. Your top 5s putting up to 1 and 15 hundredths. The approach still by far and away the second, but the around the green is not a huge factor here. That's why you've got a slight lean towards ball striking around the CC of Jackson because of this off the tee being a minuscule factor as opposed to no factor like the around the green. But for your winners, they are gaining almost a shot and a half, or I should say exactly a shot and a half per round, meaning they are averaging 6 strokes per tournament. Your winners, 6 per tournament. The approach, pretty positive. Definitely don't want to ignore that. Off the tee, decent factor, and there's really one facet of off the tee that I think we're going to want to focus on this week. We'll get into that, but you can probably guess what it is considering the fairways are fairly generous. And around the green's been fairly consistent in the sense that not the biggest of factors. Not the biggest of factors. These greens are pretty easy to hit, as we'll see. The difficulty with any around the green is due to the lightning fast greens, but that is why the putting is such a massive factor. So we'll move back into the top 10s. As you would expect, with 4 full par 5s, that is where the pros are making up the majority of their strokes. So par 5s outweighing the 4s and the 3s. If we move through the top 5s and the winners, again, par 5s. Now, the par 3s are lagging quite a bit for the top 5s, which a little bit surprising to me considering what the winners are doing. The winners are playing these difficult par 3s fairly well. They're at least getting their pars here on these difficult par 3s, par 3 10th, par 3 7th. They might get a birdie on the par 3 4th, the par 3 13th, even though it plays minuscule under par. They might squeak out a birdie throughout the week there. But you can see majority of the focus is in these par 5s. We move down to, for some reason, the course composition chart is not populating, but what I can tell you, 2 par 3s measuring under 200 yards, 2 of them measuring over 200 yards. So a pretty even split there. We'll get into the specifics in the data dive, but pretty even distribution in terms of par 3s. Par 4s, despite the length of the course, the par 4s really are pretty short. With the exception of the 2 long par 4s on the back. We do have a par 4 that's over 500, very difficult finishing par 4 18th. We also have one that's at 479. But the majority of these par 4s are pretty darn short. 449, 421, 403, 482, clearly on the longer end, 418, 411. And we do have a drivable par 4, the par 4 15th at 330. You see it yields an eagle around 1%, but lots of birdies, 36% there. So we do have a drivable par 4 at the Country Club of Jackson. So the majority of our holes here are the par 4s, 400 to 450. We have a couple from 450 to 500, and then one par 4 does measure over 500 yards. And then the par 5s, we have the shortest at 554, 584, 591. So 3 of the 4 par 5s fall between 550 and 600 yards, and then one par 5 over 600 at 612. Looking at approach shot distribution, the majority of our approach shots do come from 200 plus due to the fact that the par 5s are attackable in 2 and those longer par 4s, but at least in terms of in relation to the tour average course, we're looking at 100 to 150, particularly the 100 to 125, due to the prevalence of all of those short par 4s. Maybe something that we want to focus on. We'll take a look at that a little bit more in depth tomorrow on the Data Dive show as well, but at least in an early look, you probably want to look at your wedge players from 100 to 150 to start your approach or to start your research this week, as they're going to have to be good with these clubs to play those numerous par 4s well. We look at the historic cut line. The Country Club of Jackson, I know the year says 2015, that's the 2015 season. The fall of 2014 is when the Country Club of Jackson came into rotation on the PGA Tour. It has never been over par, and you see through the last several editions, it's actually gotten easier and easier. The easiest cut line in the history of the tournament, at least when it's been played at the Country Club of Jackson, has been -5, and that was last year. -4 the year before that. Before that, it was fairly average. The past 2 years, it has gotten a lot easier, and depending on the weather, that might be something we want to look at. Definitely on the easier side. Don't know if it's going to be an extreme birdie fest, because the winning scores really haven't been all that low. We're talking -18 was the playoff last year. I believe Sam Burns set the scoring record at -22. So there are good scores out there, but there's nothing to the level of maybe TPC Craig Ranch, or I'm trying to think of another real easy, like Kapalua. There's no minus mid-20s out there at the CC of Jackson. It's a lot of high teens to low 20s. So something we'll definitely think about. Probably going to be looking at the easy to par filter, but we'll see how we feel as we progress through the week. And that's definitely emphasized here in the scoring distribution. 20% birdies, 13% bogeys, not a whole lot of doubles. So more scores under par than over par. Accuracy, a little bit misleading just because the players aren't afraid to be in the rough. The rough isn't high. It's not penal. Not a lot of trouble if you are offline, unless you're drastically offline in OB, but that presents other challenges. So not a whole lot of penalty for players just taking driver and sending it. So the driving accuracy much lower here. Again, these greens, they're slightly larger than the PGA Tour average. They're easy to hit. Not a lot of complications on the greens, meaning undulations and slopes and whatnot. So not a whole lot of complication there. Greens are really easy to hit. Scrambling is easy here at the Country Club of Jackson. Now the 3 putts per round are about tour average, and that's due to the speed of the greens. They are fast. They are lightning fast. So if players aren't accustomed to that, it can present some challenges. And again, driving distance, a little bit longer than the tour average. So most players are just sending it. Your shorter hitters are still putting a little bit of emphasis in finding the fairway, but that's their game anyway. So no real premium on accuracy, I guess is the best way to put it. And then proximity for hitting the green, just due to the slightly larger nature of these greens in size. Proximity is a little bit further away than the average tour event. So there's a look at the Country Club of Jackson in terms of a scorecard and graphical view. Before we go back to the players in the field this week, let's take a quick look at those historic conditions that I mentioned. And you see, even though last year we, I bet this is from Mackenzie Hughes in 2 years ago, would be my guess. Yeah. So if we looked at last year's from Luke List, I'm willing to bet that it was pretty darn easy. Because you saw Mackenzie Hughes, even with the -4 cut line from 2022, the first 2 rounds were still average. Yeah, so the -5 from Luke List last year was easy. But again, it's not a complete birdie fest. 2 rounds of average and then 2 rounds of easy. 2 rounds of easy last year from Luke List, and then Saturday and Sunday became average. 2022 was easy. A couple rounds of average. What you're not going to see, or very rarely are going to see, is difficult. It's generally, easy to average, definitely on the easier side. But as I was mentioning, the last 3 years, maybe even 4 years, if we went back and checked Luke List's overview from the Sanderson Farms, they're lightning. They're lightning fast. They have been speeding up these greens significantly. Rough length, average to short, so no big deal there. Greens are generally fairly receptive because they have to water them, generally just due to the heat. But we'll take a look at the weather starting tomorrow, see if that's going to be a big factor, as well as wind and whatnot. But there's a look at the historic conditions here at Sanderson Farms and the Country Club of Jackson. So now we'll go to the players in the field this week. First thing we're going to do, let's remove the 2024 filter. We know that this course is long. It's over 7,400 yards, 7,461 on the scorecard. So in the past couple years, or 36 rounds, your top players on courses that are long, which are defined as over 7,400 per Fantasy National, your top performers have been Sam Stevens, Michael Kim, Eric Barnes, Wesley Bryan, Mark Hubbard, Hayden Springer, Nico Echeverria, Matt Kuchar, Harris English, Bryce Garnett, and Henrik Norlander. Do note that a lot of these players are players that are prevalent in these alternate field events. Someone like Sam Stevens has generally played alternate field events pretty darn well. You're thinking about the Corrales, Puerto Rico. I would say the Bermuda, but Bermuda's pretty darn short. But these longer Caribbean courses, generally speaking, Wesley Bryan, someone of that ilk, Mark Hubbard has generally played very, very well the Corrales / Puerto Rico. Nico Echeverria won the Puerto Rico Open a couple years ago. So perhaps something to think about there, at least with course length thoughts there, considering how well those players have played those events, and then coming to the Sanderson Farms should be a decent fit, at least in terms of course length. Something else that we can also look at, we just saw in the historic conditions, looks easy. Lots of scores in the high teens to the low 20s. So when courses have been easy the past couple of years, or when rounds have been easy relative to par, your top performers have been Chan Kim, Ryo Hitsatsune, Hayden Springer, Chesson Hadley, Patrick Rogers, Ben Griffin, Bo Hostler, Michael Kim, Rico Hoey, and Keith Mitchell. Let's see. We'll remove those filters there. Let's take a quick look at a couple of metrics here. We're going to skip off the tee. We're just going to look at approach and putting for this evening. So your top approach players in the field this week. We're going to look at all of 2024. Actually, let me reset this to all rounds and go 2024 season. Yes, this is going all the way back technically to the century, but let's just get a comprehensive view on who played 2024 very, very well, and then we can narrow it in throughout the week as we want. So in 2024, your top iron players have been Keith Mitchell, Doug Gim, Andrew Novak, Lucas Glover, JJ Spawn, Joel Damon, Ches Reavie, Chan Kim, Johnny Vegas, and Adams Vincent. But I should say your top approach players in the field this week have been those 10 guys. Definitely going to look at putting. We saw how important putting was in the course breakdown. And again, if we want to look at more specific information, we'll look at perhaps some putting at Wyndham, some putting at the FedEx St. Jude. But for tonight, in an initial research, let's just take a look at fast and lightning Bermuda greens. It might be okay to look at lightning, considering every single round the past 3 or 4 years has been lightning. In the off chance that that they are just fast, let's just include the fast as well. So in the past 2 years on fast and lightning Bermuda greens, your top putters in the field this week are Taylor Montgomery, Mav McNeely, Ben Griffin, Sam Ryder, Chad Ramey, Chesson Hadley, Anders Albertson, much less in terms of rounds, only 10 rounds, but has putt well on the surface, Taylor Moore, Adam Schenk, and David Skins. All right. Last thing, we're going to take a look at probably par fives. Let's take a look at par five scoring before we jump to the tournament history of the strokes gained total page view. We definitely want to look at all of 2024, and yeah, I guess it's probably safe to go with the 550 to 600 since 3 of the 4 par 5s measured to that length. The fourth one is 612, so it's feasible that comes into that 550 to 600 range. So your top par 5 performers from 550 to 600 yards this year on the PGA Tour in the field this week: Nick Dunlap, Keith Mitchell, Patrick Fishburne, Eric Cole, Bo Hostler, Mackenzie Hughes, Johnny Vegas, Mark Hubbard, Paul Barjon, and Stefan Jaeger. You'll note that I do have some players starred. That just means they're an alternate as of right now, and I'll update you throughout the week if there are any field changes, but any player that's starred right now is an alternate. Okay, let's go to the tournament history or strokes gained total page view. Let's take a look at the players in the field this week, how they have performed at the Country Club of Jackson in the past 5 years. Our strokes gained total leader is Henrik Norlander. Was in the playoff last year, lost to Luke List, who's down here, but Henrik Norlander, a runner-up, a couple of other top 5s, top 25. He did miss the cut in 2020, but a lot of solid performance here from Henrik Norlander. And it's important to note, with all that talk of putting, yet Henrik Norlander generally is not a very good putter. He is much more of a ball striker. You see, bent, POA, he's just poor. He's not a very good putter, especially in his previous 5 events. Career, not a very good putter. Bermuda, he's not as bad, but there is something about the Country Club of Jackson that he has been okay. If we look at the Sanderson Farms, I will swivel out of the way. He gained 7 last year, gained 7 in 2020, gained 2, lost a little bit, but generally he's a pretty good iron player. So something to note there as we move forward tonight and throughout the week. Maybe we're just looking for spike performances on the greens as opposed to traditionally good Bermuda putters. You see CT Pan, not very long off the tee. He has had a lot of success here with a top 10, a couple of other top 15s. Garrick Higo. Interesting to note Garrick Higo with his one PGA Tour win being at Congaree, the Palmetto Championship, when it was the 1 year it was on the schedule. Those greens were Bermuda, and I believe they were Lightning. Let's see. Yep, Palmetto. All the way back in 2021. If we take a look at that, green speeds were fast, but they were Bermuda. So, another interesting note there. Peter Malnati has been pretty solid here. I can't say only. One runner-up finish is his most notable, but he's just generally made the cut here at the Sanderson Farms. 5 for 5. Nick Hardy, 3 for 3 with a top 5. Ben Griffin, part of that runner-up quartet last year. Defending champion Luke List, a top 20, a win, a couple of missed cuts. Some other notables here: Joel Damon, a couple of top 15s. We have Hayden Buckley, a top 5, a top 20, and a missed cut. Mark Hubbard, 2 pretty poor performances, and then a top 5 and a top 10. Okay. Luke List, Stefan Yeager, been okay. Griot's been okay. Tether Moore. So there's a look at some of the players who have played the Country Club of Jackson well the past 5 years. The other side of that coin, players who have not played well here. Ches Reavie, 1 for 4. Keith Mitchell is 0 for 3 here at the Sanderson Farms. Kevin Tway, 0 for 4. Zach Blair, which I hope you played Zach Blair at the Procore. I didn't get a whole lot right about the Procore, but Zach Blair was one of the things I got right. He played very, very well there to a top 15 at a very solid, unique ownership and low price. But Zach Blair, not been very good here. The winner of the Procore, Patton Kazire, been really bad here, 1 for 5. Let's see, some other notables here. David Lipsky, who played very well at the Procore, not been good here at the Sanderson Farms. Chesson Hadley, been pretty poor. Chad Ramey, Carson Young, saying you'll know. Vincent Whaley, 5 for 5. Interesting to see Vincent Whaley, 5 for 5, yet he's been negative in terms of strokes gained. So, interesting to note that. Bramlett, Glover hadn't played for a couple years. Spawn hasn't played for a couple years. So there's a look at some of the players who haven't played the Country Club of Jackson very well the past 5 years. With that, it's a good segue. We're going to go to the early look file. And this is that same page view, that same tab that we just looked at, just broken out across these various statistics and metrics. I am going to remove anybody who's only played the Country Club of Jackson once. I want to see the players who have played multiple years here, what they've been doing well. And again, anyone with this orange designation just means they're an alternate as of right now. So if we take a look at the players who have played the Country Club of Jackson multiple times and have had good amounts of success, averaged a top 40 or better. This is 14 players, maybe a little bit light on the amount of players, but I think we'll still get a general idea of what we're looking for. Off the tee, not a huge deal here, only a 0.6. Now, Cameron Champ, big bomber off the tee. He has won here before. Higo moves it off the tee, lots of distance. But it's not necessarily, C.T. Pan, never going to be much in terms of distance. Mackenzie Hughes is not long. Peter Malnati, definitely not long. So off the tee in general, not the biggest factor, especially since these fairways are generally pretty easy to hit. What is going to be important definitely is the approach. This is a 1.8, so 3 times the importance from off the tee. Around the green, not a whole lot here, but it's still higher than I thought, 0.7. So it is technically a little bit higher than the off the tee. But you have one pretty poor performance off the tee, and then a lot of middling. But very clearly, what you can see, not a single player. Every single player who has played the Country Club of Jackson multiple times in the past 5 years and has averaged a top 40 are all positive in putting. You've got to be able to putt to contend here at the Sanderson Farms. I mean, Higo, not a very good putter, 5.5. Ben Griffin, pretty decent putter. Cameron Champs, not a good putter, 1.7. So there's something about these greens that some of these players like, and we'll have to take note of that. I mentioned Henrik Norlander. Mackenzie Hughes, just a very, very good putter in general. Malnati's generally a good putter, but lots of putting here at the Country Club of Jackson. Moving to fairways, greens, and all that. I was talking about how you don't necessarily need off the tee, but I was going to focus on one particular aspect of it. I do think bombers have an advantage here. The fairways are generous. The rough is not penal. There's no real reason for players not to just send it. And that's why you see players like Cameron Champ and Garrick Higo. Nick Hardy can move it a slight bit. So distance, I think, is going to be more important than accuracy for sure. I am going to be interested in looking at some distance this week. It's not mandatory. Look at CT Pan. Look at Joel Damon. Peter Malnati, not long off the tee. So it's not mandatory, but I am going to favor the Bombers this week when thinking about my player pool for DFS and thinking about some wagers. I do think that is where we're going to want to look. Good drives gained, 1.2, not a whole lot there. Nothing in fairways. These fairways are generous, so there's just not a lot to be gained by being a precision player this week. Greens is fine. You would expect it to be the highest of any of these, but even so, that number wasn't that large. Going into scoring, birdies, bogeys, as per usual, I would say the more consistent metric is in the bogey avoidance. Not a single player negative in bogey avoidance, 2.3, but the larger numbers, the best performances are in these birdies gained. So bigger spike performances in the birdies gained. And that's where we're probably going to look. Probably birdies gained when it's easy. Probably opportunities when it's easy. That is where I'm leaning early on this week in terms of the Sanderson Farms. Moving into par 3s, 4s, and 5s. Par 3s we saw, except for the winners, they didn't really contribute a whole lot. Cameron Champ, sure. Sam Burns isn't in the field. There's Luke List. He's been just field average at the par 3s. So, there's not a whole lot to be gained here. This is 0.7. Par 4s. Yes, there's not a single negative here, but this is only a 2.9. That's not very large. Look at it's off your screen. The par 5s, not a single player negative in those, is a 2.0. The par 5s, this is one of the bigger numbers I've seen. Double the importance of the par 3s. Just a lot here in the par 5s. A lot here in the par 5s. If we look at the par 4s specifically, most of them come from 400 to 450. So sure. Okay. 1.3. 450 to 5. Despite all the green, it's only a 0.9. So, yeah. Probably looking at 400, 450, but again, when we get to the Data Dive show tomorrow, we'll really dig into the specifics around the Country Club of Jackson. But there's the par 5s and how only one player, I was incorrect, I said nobody, only one player negative in par 5s. Lots of good performances in here as well. And then, just for your viewing information, there's some proximity. Like, some of the best players historically at the Country Club of Jackson, these total prox numbers are negative. There's not a lot to gain here, it doesn't seem. The 100 to 150 are the two ranges most prevalent, but really it kind of looks like the 100 to 125. But even then, you have a couple of poor performers in there. But anyway, there is a look at the historic performance of the players in the field this week at the Sanderson Farms. That's going to do it for the initial research show this evening. A little bit on the shorter side. Again, we get into a lot more of the data tomorrow in the Data Dive show, so we make sure to set your reminders for that, 9 p.m. tomorrow, and be on the lookout for the research that I'm going to post tomorrow around previous winners of the Sanderson Farms, patterns of those winners, and players in the field this week who also fit those patterns. I'll have that out on social media tomorrow. Be on the lookout for that. Thanks for tuning in this evening. I always appreciate it. Love what I do. Taking a very in-depth look at sports statistics, giving you a statistician and data analyst view of what he sees, trying to help us all win a little bit of money in the process. So thanks again for all the support, for all the wagers that you made for the Pro Core and for the President's Cup, for all of the DFS contests you played at the Pro Core and for the President's Cup. And until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive show, may all your bets be profitable.